Good evening and welcome to the Town of Sandwich Finance Committee meeting for March 18th, 2025. Tonight's meeting is being aired on Sandwich Community Television and will be available for replay. Bill Jennings, our town's finance director, is joining us remotely this evening. It's 6 p.m. and I'm calling our meeting to order. Let's begin by rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. As a reminder to the committee and myself, let's remember to turn on our microphones and speak clearly into them so those at home and those in our auditorium can hear us well. Our next item on our agenda is time for public comment. Does anyone with us tonight wish to make a comment as we start off the meeting? Jean? Bob, can you share your that microphone with Jean?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gene Perini, 6 Piccadilly Road, Sandwich, Massachusetts. Thank you. It's good to be with you all here tonight. Just want to thank the town for posting all the budget documents on the website. It's very informative, very useful. And forgive me if I've missed this, but is there a document that lists all the grants awarded to the town of Sandwich to date? And would that document include the amount of grants, who the grant was provided from, the date that the funds must be used, the portions used, and the balances left over? I think sometimes that may be helpful because as we're budgeting for different items, maybe those grant funds are being used. So thank you for your consideration.
Thanks, Gene. Thank you, Gene. Any other public comments? Candy?
Candy Thompson, 30 Kensington Drive. Some of you have heard this before at the CPC meeting, and to you I apologize. But several weeks ago, Finance Committee member Nancy Crossman asked the town when it was going to tackle the task of providing legitimate, accessible parking for this building. She got the rote response about the difficulty of the project, but received no commitment. It's the same answer we've heard for 3 years. 3 years. So I am following up on Mrs. Crossman's question. Here we are about to spend $2.2 million to repair this building, and we ignore a very real and fixable problem. The Select Board, the School Committee, the Finance Committee, and the Historic District Committee all meet in this room. A fundraising dance for this building will be held here Saturday night. We hold plays and author talks. We have candidate forums here, and the Sandwich Arts Alliance lives right downstairs. This building is the heart of our village. In their application this year for $1.2 million in CPC funds, town officials noted their commitment to, quote, promoting access to this important historic resource and cultural opportunity. Keyword, access. What good is having ramps and elevators if you can't get to them? The architect's renovation plan in 2009 shows 2 accessible parking spaces on Grove Street. closest to the building. They were left out of the completed project for reasons unknown. 12 years after that facelift, and after much pestering, the town marked off one Grove Street space with paint and a sign and designated it for those with physical challenges. With it came a promise that an upgraded space was, quote, in the works, unquote. 3 years later, we're still waiting. A multi-million-dollar renovation of a town icon, paid for with tax dollars, that isn't welcoming to all its citizens is shameful. With approval in May, voters will have spent $5.3 million over 15 years to improve this building. But all that investment has not resulted in accessible parking. Accessibility in a town like Sandwich, with a graying population and large numbers of veterans and disabled citizens and tourists, is vital. This is a quality of life issue, and frankly, not correcting it flies in the face of the proclamation our select board signed in 2021, pledging to make our town inclusive and welcoming. We may have missed the boat in making this part of the $2.2 million capital project, but please, let's get some guarantees that town officials will include money for 2 parking spaces in their next spending plan. It's the decent thing to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Candy. Anybody else for public comment? Okay. Seeing no others, let's move on to next agenda item is minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes from February 25th, 2025 and March 4th, 2025 to review and approve. I see a correction that's needed on the February 25th minutes in regard to the unanimous vote for approving the February 11th meeting, where it should be 6-0, not 4-0. Does anyone else have any edits to the February 11th minutes? Okay, seeing none there, do I have a motion to accept with the correction the minutes?
Motion.
Motion by Crystal.
Motion. Second.
Second by Nancy. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Unanimous. 1 abstention. Thank you. For the March 4th, 2025 minutes, are there any edits that need to be noted? Seeing that we don't have any, do I have a motion to accept those minutes?
Motion.
Crystal, and second by Nancy. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Thank you all. Next up are the correspondence, statements, and announcement. Does anyone have anything to add? Nothing at this point, which takes us to our town manager's report. Bud, could you lead us off with any updates to the fiscal 2026 budget you may have for us this evening?
Yeah, there's no changes on that 1-page summary that we look at every week. Just to explain the different attachments to your agenda, and we're going to be talking about most of these later in the night, but the front is the primary agenda cover sheet plus the attachments. The second thicker packet is the background on the town meeting warrant, which we'll be going through in a few seconds. After that, there's a 5-page summary, mostly spreadsheets that Bill, Heather, and I will go over shortly, mostly in response to questions that the committee had at your last meeting and then over the last week. After that is a document that just came last week where we did the wastewater update to the committee 2 weeks ago. This is a Cape-wide summary that was prepared by the Cape Cod Commission explaining what all 15 towns were doing and, fairly recent in terms of the updates. And after he read it, Dave Mason said we should really give this to the Select Board and Finance Committee, just because when you look at the totality of what some of the other communities are having to do, it gives you a feel that as difficult as what we have to do is, the numbers are much, much less. So it might be worth looking at just to get a feel for what's going on across the Cape. And then lastly, based on some questions over the last few meetings, we thought it would be helpful if we replicated, if the committee remembers when Brian Schlegel, our facilities director, came to the group last June, he gave an extensive presentation on all the work that he's done on town buildings from 2019 to 2024, listed by building, and then there were a number of spreadsheets, but we felt those were overwhelming, so, and there's been some turnover, so I just wanted people to see that. So just a summary of the work that's been done on buildings. And that was it.
Okay. Thanks, Bud. Just as a reminder we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is the warrant preview and discussion that Bud will take us through. But just as a reminder, town bylaws require us, the Finance Committee, to consider all fiscal articles in warrants for all town meetings and report our recommendations before each annual town meeting. So with that, Bud, please take us through the expected financial-related articles in the warrant that the FinCom will be voting to make recommendations on at an upcoming meeting.
Sure. So I'll mostly focus on the ones that have numbers attached to them. So on the cover sheet, there's the figures that are presented in the budget binder and that we've talked about at meetings in red. So the first article with numbers in it is Article 1, and that's the primary budget article. As the committee knows, like of that one-page summary that we look at all the time, about 90% of the funding is in that one article. It comes from probably 8 or 9 different sources, some of it taxes, some of it transfers from other funds, but the grand total is the $99,328,112. And if you look in the packets, right after the first one-page summary that we look at all the time, there's the printout of what it will look like in the warrant that adds up to that $99,328,112. So it has all the departmental budget appropriations in terms of what was recommended for 26, all the transfers that we take from different funds, and then lastly, some of the other items like, health insurance, liability insurance, unemployment, OPEB, stabilization, all that. So all that's spelled out on those 2 pages. Again, I thought the goal was tonight just to explain what each of the articles was. I'm not sure if there were, I think the votes are planned for next week, so I don't know if you want me to spend a little more time on that or just keep going.
But can you just explain why the 99 million doesn't get reflected on the
Yeah, so if you look at the one-page summary that we're so familiar with the landscape, for example, if you look at the upper right, the recap sheet items, those aren't voted on at town meeting. Those are done when we file the proper state reports through the town accountant's office. So that 5.8 million isn't voted on at all. The town meeting items, almost every one of those are listed in the summary that you have that's shown on those next 2 pages. But you also have to remember that the operating budgets, some of them are net. For example, we transfer money from the ambulance fund. We transfer money from the Weston Memorial Fund for the library. There's some school transfers. So those transfers, so we're looking at a net total on that one-page summary, but all those transfers are listed on the second page. There's probably a group of about 10 different transfers that are listed there that total just under $3 million.
Thank you.
Article 3 are the 4 enterprise funds. So just to remind everyone again, there's no significant changes in any of those 4 budgets. First is our cable access funding. The next is the DPW sanitation operations. The third is Sandwich Hollows Golf Course. And the fourth is the Sandwich Marina. So those numbers that you see on that cover sheet are the same as what's in your budget binder for the 4 enterprise funds. And then I reproduced just the front page of the different enterprise fund packets so you could see how the numbers matched up in the attachments in this packet. The revolving fund appropriation limits, we don't appropriate money to those. We have to set the maximum limit that each of those accounts has. So that's one where I'll bring a printout of those at your next meeting. You probably should take a vote on that because it is financial article, even though we're not appropriating any money. But it establishes those limits for the upcoming year. And you might remember it's a chart that's printed in the warrant with probably 8 to 10 accounts that are listed. Most of them are on the town side. There's 1 or 2 on the school side. Capital budget, Article 5. So the grand total on the capital, exclusive of the 1.2 million in CPA funds, which comes later, is the total is 1,557,209, and that matches the capital list that's in the attachment. The Capital Improvement Planning Committee did vote on Monday to unanimously recommend the list. Inclusive in that are 2 transfers, one from the Golf Enterprise Fund and one from the Marina Enterprise Fund to pay for their capital items. So it reduces the net appropriation to 1.143709. So I know we might talk about that later, or because I think their capital items are later on in the night or next week, but the list of those items is in the attachment. In hindsight, I should have put pages on all these, so I could refer to a page number, so I apologize for that. Chapter 6, we typically take a vote as well, even though no money's appropriated. It's just our ability to accept and to spend our Chapter 90 funds. The state wants us to vote that every year. Even though when we go to town meeting, we don't know what that number will be. Traditionally, it's been just under 800,000 roughly, but we're still waiting. So there's no number associated with it. We just have to vote to accept it so that we can spend it. Articles, the next like 5 or 6 are annual ones we do. The first is for the cell tower lease. There's a cellular, I think it's Verizon, on top of the middle high school. So the lease payments that are made get transferred out, and they can only be spent in accordance with a prior vote at town meeting, and that's for improvements on the exterior fields and facilities at the school. So this year it's $34,618. Next, we have a similar vote that was taken at town meeting years ago that requires us to set aside 20% of our beach parking funds. Then that 20% gets reappropriated and put in an account for beach renourishment. So that number this year is $80,196. Again, it's one we do each year. Same thing with the next one, which is the Sandwich Promotions Fund. So when our rooms tax revenues come in, there's a special act that dictates how we have to apportion that out. I could run through the percentages if you want, but in short, in the end, half goes to an account that could only be used for debt eligible purposes. So it's almost like a mini savings fund if we had to pay something and we had a difficult time coming up with the money. And then of the remaining 50%, and this is where it sort of gets confusing, 75% goes to the general fund, 10%, and I know I'm talking about 50% in bigger 100% terms. 10% goes to the Visitor Services Board, 10% to the Sandwich Chamber, 5% to the Canal Region Chamber. So those last 3 are what we vote, and so those 3 appropriations total $150,615.
But I know I ask every year just to be sure something hasn't changed. But on the canal one, are we still the only town amongst the canal group that?
I think we're the only.
Did we have a choice on any of those?
We really don't, because it's in the special act, so we have to follow it. But no, I don't believe Bourne or Wareham contribute to the canal region. They may make one-time appropriations occasionally, but not every year like this.
Nancy?
The 75% of the 50% that goes to the general fund, what do we usually do with that?
That's in our local receipts. So when you see, like on the front of that, the big budget summary, it says local receipts totaling, I just don't want to misquote it, $6,750,000. That's included in that.
And does that get tagged for anything in particular?
No, it just helps, fund the budget for the next year. Just like everything else with receipts, like the state strongly encourages us to underestimate those because they don't want us, spending money we don't have. Article 10 become an annual appropriation, and that's if there's a balance in the Water Infrastructure Fund account to appropriate it for wastewater purposes to keep our efforts going. And the current balance is over this, but we're proposing to transfer $750,000. The next one, Article 11, is a little bit...
Sorry,
Oh,
on that one.
yeah.
Where does it get transferred to Public Works?
No, it just goes into an account for, basically CWRMP, Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan, efforts and implementation. So it goes into a capital account for that.
So we have it in an account
Yeah.
because of WIF.
Yeah.
And
Then you have to vote to move it out of the account. For WIF.
And it's designated specifically for wastewater
Yes.
purposes.
Yep.
Okay.
Next one's a little bit unique, and Heather can explain it better. So we have those national opioid settlement funds. The committee will remember we funded a position in the police department that's helping all town departments, a social worker position that's really doing an outstanding job. Off the top of my head, Bill can correct me, I think it's $85,000 that goes towards that each year, more or less. And then, so Heather's been leading up a committee that's been looking at these funds and what we should do with them. And so there's a plan to go ahead and procure some opioid prevention outreach services that we would, be able to do outreach to people in the public. And the goal would be to do that over a multi-year period, and the $50,000 would go towards that.
Bob?
I probably didn't explain it well.
No, probably small potatoes, but when you take settlement money and you fund a position, are you funding the position in terms of current salary and benefits, and also retirement costs and liabilities, or are we just funding salary and then the retirement plan costs and associated liabilities get picked up somewhere else? I recognize small dollars, but
Yep.
how does it work?
Again, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but I believe we're just paying the salary. We're not paying for the benefits. I don't know if that person is on health insurance or not. I don't know.
That is correct.
Yeah. And it's guaranteed funding for, I think it's 21 years. It's a weird number, and there's more than enough to fund the position for that period. This other special service, we can do that occasionally, but not regularly.
Who writes the check? Does the federal government write the check, or is it?
There's settlements, I'm not exaggerating, probably with 9 different drug companies, pharmacies. So I think it's quarterly payments that the treasurer's office receives.
U.S. treasurers?
Yeah. Our
No.
town treasurer, we receive.
Yeah,
Yeah. So our allotment.
So I'll jump in, Ed. So we do receive payments, and it's from a national court case and a settlement. So we get payments from like CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid, Walmart, companies like that took part in the court case, and we receive settlement funds from that. It's a national court case, and so Sandwich did take part, and we do receive funding from that.
And there are strict limitations on what you can use the money for.
Okay, thank you.
So the next two, 12 and 13, I'll talk as a group. So the first is our annual CPA vote that we do constantly. It's to appropriate our administrative costs. I think we say this to the committee all the time. We've always appropriated $75,000 a year. We typically spend not even half that. Unlike other funds that go to back at the general fund at the end of the year, this goes back into the CPA account. So it's used for things like if we need an appraisal done, if there's a small project that the group decides to fund, they can fund it from there, things like that. Then we're required to do 10% allocations for the 3 CPA funding areas, and that's open space, historic resources, and affordable housing resources. So 10% each gets put in those. The other 70% goes into a generic CPA fund. And then lastly, this is where we make our debt payment from. So we make an appropriation to cover the debt. So all those three things are rolled into one article each year. And then this year, there's only one project that the group is supporting, and that's the $1.2 million to add to the prior appropriations from last year, not from the CPA, but from other sources. And this is for the town hall restoration. And in my opinion, I know it's something this group talked about at least 5 years ago, like, are there ways we can use CPA funds to sort of pay for some capital needs on the town side instead of funding, I think the phrase was special interest projects or other things. So that's what this is geared towards. I don't know if you want me to run down the others really quickly. There's a good chance 14 will come off if we don't have to change what we previously voted for a home rule petition. We actually have a meeting with the state treasurer's office and town council on Thursday. So hopefully we'll get a little clarity on that. I should explain a couple of these because they don't relate to any appropriation, but in my opinion, they relate to money. So 15 and 16, there was an act approved by the state legislature last year called the HERO Act. I will butcher the explanation, but it's basically higher levels of personal exemptions that disabled veterans could receive. So there's already laws in place that if you're a disabled veteran, you get a certain discount on your motor vehicle excise, you can get a certain discount on your taxes. There's certain things that you have to meet to qualify for that, but if you apply for it, you get it. That gets paid out of our overlay account, which if you look on, it's one of those things that's listed as the recap sheet items that I said don't get voted on at town meeting, are abatements and overlay. So that's where all the exemptions get paid from. And there's probably 10 different types of exemptions that the state has. So with this new HERO Act, they're allowing towns to vote locally. The first provision in Article 15 would adopt an increase in those minimum amounts that the exemption would have that would get adjusted each year by the National Consumer Price Index as determined by the State Department of Revenue Commissioner. So they would let us know for the following year how much, making it up 3%. If the prior exemption was $400, which I think it is for motor vehicle excises, it would go up 400 times 1.03, so we'd have $412 the year after. A little bit interesting, and I know Bill can explain this better. If we adopt some of these additional exemptions, there's no state reimbursement for it. There's no reimbursement for motor vehicle excise anyway. For personal exemptions on your taxes, to their credit, the state pays us back 100% of those costs 1 year later. So if you look on the cherry sheet, there's actually a line that says veterans benefits. That matches what we paid the year before. If we adopt this Article 16, which is the next one, it would increase the personal exemption for a disabled vet, and the Board of Assessors is studying this right now. You can go anywhere from, is it 25% to 100%, Bill, I think?
Yes, yes, that is correct.
So the Board of Assessors they're reviewing this, and they're going to make a recommendation to the Select Board. And so there would be a percentage that would go above the exemption on your taxes. Now, whatever that additional amount the town votes, you would not be reimbursed. So we would still get reimbursed what the state exemption is, but not any local additional benefit that we would vote. I will say, like, if you read the law and what its intent was, it's for a very valid, worthy purpose. So my guess is there will be support from the board and from the Board of Assessors on both these. I think a key thing will be what will the Board of Assessors recommend on the tax exemption portion, on the percentage. And you have to, prove that you're disabled. There's all sorts of forms you have to file. I don't believe, is it income-based as well, Bill?
I'm not sure on the income requirements, but there is a certain form that verifies their medical condition that the assessing office does verify.
How much money are we talking?
Yeah, I don't know it right now. I know Ben, but I'll turn it over to Bill. He probably knows.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's a little hard to determine for us because the number is so fluid. Because you may have a certain amount of veterans exemptions this year, and that number is totally different than last year. It depends on if people apply, when they apply, if they pass away, if they move away. So unfortunately, it's a fluid number. We are going to try to come up with an estimate that we're working on currently, but it would be just that, an estimate, because the number would be so fluid from year to year.
But we would know, for example, what it would be if we did it for this year. Would we know that?
We have the data, and Ben Steich, our assessor, is working on that right now, and he's working with his board on that currently. But we do have a general idea of what it would be. It's not going to be a significant number.
And then Article 17 is interesting again, somewhat complex. So the easiest way I can explain it, the laws that a town and regulations a town has to follow, if a property goes into tax title, meaning they're more than 1 year past due on their taxes, there's a very lengthy process that we have to do to try to redeem those payments. If many years go by with many, like literally dozens of chances to redeem them, there's actually a process where the town can take a property. There's all sorts of laws that we would have to follow. There's special attorneys that do this for us. I'm not going to say like rare, but it's pretty rare that we get so far as a property's taken and the owner has number of chances to redeem their property. Even when land court, which is the ultimate authority, says it's the town's, they still have a full year to redeem. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. There was a court case, I believe it was federal, and then in response to that, the state adopted some laws that the interest rates that by law towns were able to bring in, I think was in excess of 14% a year. Those have all been amended down to 8% a year, so those have been dropped. And there's a question that's arisen only as a result of this court case within the last year or two. If a town acquires the property and makes money on it, and sells it and makes money on it, does the prior owner, are they due any money back? And so the laws have completely changed. It's really complex. We're still trying to get our head around it. One of the things that town council has recommended, and I know Bill will explain this part better, certain times there's other abandoned funds that are in control of the town that property owner may have turned over that they've abandoned. If we don't accept this provision, which town council has recommended we adopt, we have to turn that money over to the state. So I think our thought is, why turn the money over to the state, which is why town council is recommending all their clients accept this provision of the general laws. Now, if you ask me what's a good example of abandoned funds, I couldn't really tell you. Bill could probably explain that better.
So as Bud has mentioned, tax title has gone through significant changes in the last year. There was significant law changes, some of which, to be frank, has been a detriment to towns across the Commonwealth. So this is part of, and the DOR is still kind of sorting out the timing of these things, how we apply these new laws. As Bud mentioned, there's a significant change in the interest rate. So currently, the way the new law reads is that a current tax bill, if it's overdue, is charged 14% interest. However, if a property is in tax title, we're only allowed now to charge 8% interest. So it really doesn't jive with current real estate taxing laws in Massachusetts. So there's a lot that the DOR is still hashing out. But this particular one is recommended by town council, and it's really about the unclaimed excess equity in the property. So to keep it simple, if we foreclosed on a home, which I can tell you I did once in 10 years as treasurer collector. So it is rare. But if, let's say we foreclosed on a property in town and they owed us, say, $25,000 in taxes, and that property was then sold for $100,000, that excess equity, or that $75,000, under the current law changes would then move directly to the state of Massachusetts. What this would allow is for those funds to stay here. And if those funds went unclaimed, eventually they would be returned to the town. So again, this is really a new statute. Town council is recommending it to us, and we would like to move forward with the statute.
All set on the list. I have one question that we actually sent ahead on CPA that he didn't ask at that point, but I recall that when we awarded the monies to the developer for the wing school, that the CPA fund was at a very low level. So where are we at with that, particularly in regard to being able to fund the 1.2 or Old Town Hall?
Sure, I'll take that one if you want, but we are perfectly capable right now of paying for that. We would be paying cash for that. The CPA, it's roughly, right now, I think it's about 16 or 18% of what's in the CPA. However, we're about to collect a lot more taxes on May 1st, so that number would go down, but we certainly have the cash reserves without issue to pay for that $1.2 million for the town hall restoration if approved by town meeting.
Did I follow right? The 1.2 represent about 17% of the total reserve?
Correct, yeah. And as I was mentioning to you in your email, that number, of course, changes every day depending on how much CPA revenue we take in at the tax counter and what bills are paid that week. But yeah, right around there is correct.
Okay. Any other questions on the warrant before we move on, and in anticipation that we'll vote on these one by one next week in terms of our recommendation? Okay, no questions. We'll move on to our next agenda item.
Can I add, Ed?
Go ahead, Bud.
Earlier, well, when I left the office about 5, the Board of Assessors were meeting. So hopefully, and they meet every other week. So hopefully I'll know what percentage, if they are thinking about one on that Article 16. Hopefully by next week I'd know what that was. And just so the committee's aware, unfortunately it's 2 nights after you guys vote, the department heads who help oversee 16, 17, 18, and 19 are coming to the select board meeting that Thursday night just to explain the articles better. So,
Jackie, yes.
I just have a clarification. So we see the enterprise funds and the operating budget, and we see this listed as a separate item in the warrant. I guess where is the revenue side of that? Is that showing up?
So in your budget binders, right behind the general government budget in tab 5, I think it is, there's a blue sheet that separates the enterprise funds, and I think there's about a dozen pages for each enterprise funds.
Yes.
So it shows the revenue, it shows the expenses. I would say, and Heather and Bill, please feel free to jump in. I'm going to characterize the 4 accounts like in as simple terms as I can. The public cable access money that we get comes from Xfinity. We get, if it's, I'm just as off the top of my head, if we get 4.5%, the Sandwich Community Television gets 4%, and we keep 0.5% for capital needs related to AV and IT issues. A great example that we may be doing very soon, because those of you who were here early last week, we were having problems with the AV. So our hired gun that helps us on AV problems was able to come last Tuesday night. And the first thing he said is that projector's lost its ability to be bright enough, and the whites are not white, and whatever. It's over 15 years old. It's awesome. It gets used all the time. So he strongly recommends we look at replacing that. And so we have a small group getting together literally in the next few weeks to decide, okay, and we'd probably take the money from that, from that cable money. So that's a real small one. Next one is DPW sanitation that Paul oversees. That one's critical because, as we've talked before, it's that balance between sticker fees and bag fees. And the select board authorized a certain increase every other year for each item. That's worked really well. And so there was a time when the year-end balance in the enterprise fund for sanitation was getting concerning. We don't have a ton of money there, but we're very comfortable with how it's been operating. It's been very consistent, so that's good. Sandwich Hollows Golf Club, the best thing I can say is ever since we authorized the debt for the irrigation improvements, some tee box improvements, other things, we were all a little bit nervous because I think we had authorized spending up to $3 million. We only bonded $2 million because we were just, we get nervous. They've been doing great, and I don't want to jinx us, but they've had no issue paying that debt payment every year. This upcoming year will be their 4th year, and they've had enough money, so if you look on our capital list, there's also like a $250,000 item to help extend some of the cart paths, which we started to do last year. It looks great. So that's positive. And then the marina is, this is going to sound terrible, is the richest of the 4 in the sense you have a captured audience. We control everything in terms of the slip fees with the Army Corps of Engineers, the gas fees, everything else. So, I mean, it would be next to impossible for us not to cover our expenses there. And what we try to do is earn enough so the bigger capital items, as you can imagine, capital items at a marina are really high priced. So we're constantly, replacing a dock or upgrading the electric system, stuff like that. So that one works, I would say, the most seamless of the 4. And I would say the one we worry about the most is the golf. I'm being very honest here. And, I think in the long run, we always worry about sanitation costs, but as long as we have the flexibility on the transfer station stickers, actually we don't have stickers anymore, we have the plate reader and the bag fees, we should be fine with that. I think our contract with CMAS probably has about another 5 years. We just did a 5-year extension, but when that looks to run out, that will be interesting. That will be a lot of work for, for the people to figure out what's the best way to go forward, because I was really the only game in town back then. I think Bourne has gotten permission to do some more landfilling. They're one of the few active landfills in the state. How that will all play out in 5 years, that's a really interesting topic. But knock on wood, all 4 are going great right now.
And
we're not supplementing their budgets at all, with the one exception. And this came up, you might remember this like a decade ago. The select board was concerned because they felt it wasn't fair to charge residents for at the time, their dump stickers. They shouldn't have to pay for the trash that comes from the 3 schools and from town buildings. So we make a $60,000 appropriation to their budget each year to cover those expenses. So the voters aren't paying for that.
Okay, so the revenue, I mean, most of these are in the black, but the revenue isn't noted as revenue. It gets transferred into other funds to pay for some of these upgrades.
I'll let Bill explain.
Sure. Yeah. So take the golf course, for instance. They do use their own revenues to support their budget, just like marina and transfer station do. Yeah. What they do at the end of the year is how it gets certified with the Department of Revenue is where the town gets certified for free cash. The enterprise funds go through the same exact process. Instead of it being called free cash, it's called retained earnings, so that they're able basically to put away money. So each of those accounts does have a retained earnings balance. And then they're able to spend out of that retained earnings, whether it's for capital, whether it's to support their budget, whatever the case may be, they can use those funds on an annual basis to help support their own enterprise fund. And the only transfer that the enterprise funds make into the town is they do pay to cover some of the payroll costs that the treasurer's and accounting office does for them, and also some facilities work, as well. But all 4 of those have revenues, and the revenue support those specific enterprise funds. So no tax dollars support those, with the exception of that $60,500 that Bud mentioned.
Retained earnings, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Nancy?
I have a couple questions on the cable. It looks like over the past few years, the monies have been fairly stable, but you hear a lot about people dropping it, and we all know our bills have gone up, so I'm guessing that's how it stays stable. Is there a concern about that number going down, so our use of the monies that we get would be down?
Sure, I'll take that one as well if you like. So we have projected a small decrease in the cable funds. I think we moved it down to $517,000 this year. You are correct that we are seeing smaller increments come from the cable, and a lot of that has to do with people leaving Comcast in this, or Xfinity, excuse me, in this case, and going out to something else, a streaming service or whatever. But what we're careful to do with the cable access fund is just to make sure that we always keep bringing that revenue down so that we don't run into any issues there.
When is the next contract due with them?
A long way off, yeah. At least a decade.
Yeah, we just did that in 2021, so we're quite a ways away.
Is that a 10-year contract?
It's 20.
It's 20.
20?
They're long, they're long. But really, it's the community television really earns the lion's share of those funds. And so their operating expenses would really have to be adjusted.
All right. Any other questions regarding the warrant items? All right. If not, let's move on to our next agenda item, which was fiscal 26 budget and capital follow-ups. It's based on discussions we've had over the last several weeks, as well as questions that we have submitted to the town, to Bud and Bill and Heather and others along the way. So that item is planned in anticipation of responding to those questions. Some were submitted, as I said, to Bud and Bill ahead of tonight's meeting. They were all meant as an opportunity to clarify and help each of us come up to the recommendations that we'll be asked to make for the annual town meeting. And those, hopefully, we'll be voting on that recommendation next week. As always, feel free during this part of our meeting to ask additional questions or make comments. But we'll have Bud and Bill maybe take us through that and get us started, and then proceed from there.
So I think would be best if I went through this handout, which is 5 pages, and I did put on the bottom right of each page, there is a page number. And I'll try to go through this fairly methodically and slow. And if people have any questions on any of the pages, let me know. And I think mostly over the weekend when we saw what some of the questions were focused on, I had some thoughts about how best to try to answer and show like a bigger history to explain like how we got to certain places. And then in talking things over with Bill and Heather the last 2 days, and some of it went back to Sunday, like I think we tried to find a way to show some, I think a more interesting way to look at some of the things that we see all the time. So the first couple pages aren't that interesting, but I think the last 3 are more so. And I know there were definite questions about trying to project out some of these bigger projects that we really don't have hard estimates for, but we wanted to show you at least within a range of what it could look like, and I will explain what that range is. But I shouldn't go there until we get to the last page. So the first page, first I want to explain where this comes from. So in your budget binder, there's a sheet that shows the last 5 years of capital budget expenditures. And as the footnote says at the bottom, which I'm going to paraphrase, it's the total amount, not the net amount. So many times, as you know, we pay for things possibly from the ambulance fund or from any of those enterprise funds that we just talked about. And then there have been a couple times in the past when we've done capital outlay expenditure exclusions, which a way to think about it, it's a 1-year debt exclusion, but you're not issuing debt. So it's more for projects that are probably more than you normally could afford within your regular capital budget, but it's big enough but you don't want to issue debt for. So a great example were years ago, and I highlighted, I get going too fast. So what's in your binder shows 5 years. All I did was highlight the 2 rows because we had hid 20 years because, it's overwhelming if you look at all that. All I did was unhide the data that's in your binder. So what you see here, didn't take any more work. It just, I unhid the rows. And then I did color code so you could see, because some of the questions we had last week were related to the DPW and how do we, address the need about trying to keep our roads at a certain level. So you'll see that in FY15 and FY17, we did do 2 $1.3 million 1-year extra raises so they could go towards the roads. My recollection is the year in between, the select board decided not to ask the voters, and then the year after, the voters said no. So after that, the board asked for a road bond, which was approved, and I forget the exact amount, but a road bond was done, and a number of repairs were done, but as the committee's aware, there's still more we need to do. So that just gives you a feel for how much has been appropriated each year for capital. And again, those years, many years before, there were a couple of capital outlay exclusions we did on the high school for improvements. Those are listed. But you can see I added FY26 pending. And so if you do everything that we've planned for FY26, it comes to 2.75 million, which as you look up the list is the second or the third highest we've ever done. One year we did more when we needed to come up with money for 100 Route 6A, and then the year we actually bought 100 Route 6A and did some of those renovations, that was the big year in FY20. So any questions on that page? So all I did on page 2 is if you turn the page, and you may say this is a lame argument, I think it's valid. We've tried to add money to the DPW operating budget to get to that magic total number of 2.6 million a year between those state Chapter 90 funds, the so-called fair share funds from the state, and then what Paul had in his budget. So you may remember that the committee supported and town meeting did in FY23, we added $650,000 to Paul's operating budget for public infrastructure improvements. So he's had those for 3 fiscal years running. And then if we went to the optimal budget, we would add another 560. So he would have, compared to what he had prior to FY23, a little bit over $1.2 million more in his operating budget. So he can do capital work to complete those repairs. And on the right, all I did was total, the column of the gross amount that we had voted each year, plus what we added to Paul's budget, and on the right is the total additional capital. All the other numbers on that page are the exact same as the page before, other than those 2 small columns on DPW. So I just wanted to show you that.
So, Bud, the total additional capital reflects just DPW infrastructure over 5 years.
Yes, yep.
So going forward, these numbers are all in the base of the DPW. And I remember at one point we talked about there was only a certain amount of work that physically could be done due to weather and traffic and people. What's in the future for this line?
I would say if we can keep it in the operating budget, I think it would be perfect, because if you look at what he gets from state funding, which you can carry over year to year, it's almost a 50-50 split. So it'd be good because he would know how much he'd have in his budget to plan for each year. And hypothetically, a great example, not hypothetically, but a great example is the Route 130 Quaker Meeting House Road intersection in front of the Forestdale School. That cost on that is way more than anything that he would have each year. So he was able to build his Chapter 90 funds up for a couple years so he could do a bigger project like that. And I don't want to talk for Paul because he can explain it better than I can, but I don't know if you want to add anything yet, or
Jim?
Yeah, just some questions in that regards to the roads. So are the roads done in-house or do we contract that out?
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Paul now, but yeah.
And thank you, Paul, for showing. I had missed the previous meeting, so thank you for.
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, the roads themselves, the road repairs, do we contract that work out or do we do that in-house?
We try to find an optimal balance between having contractors do it and us doing some of the work as well. We don't have the staff and resources to be able to do a lot of the bigger projects, so we do contract out through Barnstable County. So majority of our work is done by contractors.
And as with the question about, the amount of work that could be done, I mean, is there just an amount of work that physically can be done for the roads every year with all these factors in play, such as, weather, traffic, and what have you?
Yeah, when we had our overrides, and I think it was, Bud mentioned 1.3 million, we quickly spent that. So we have as you know, we have a backlog of infrastructure projects, and we do have enough contractors to help us with that. And we're able to do quite a bit of projects in 1 year. So, and as Bud mentioned, we can always carry over the Chapter 90 money if we have extra money.
The pavement report itself, is that something that the public can find? The pavement management report, is that online?
I believe that might be on our website, but it's not. We can make that available.
Okay, because I know that's, people are always asking, where's my road in this? And I know if that was out there, that would certainly educate people.
Yeah, we do have a list of all the roads and the assessment and the actual treatment for those roads and the cost to upgrade those roads as well.
I saw that, but the pavement management report itself sounds a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, that details the work behind the assessment of all the roads, the inventory taken for the roads, what type of treatments we're looking at for the roads, and how we prioritize the roads as part of that each year process when we tackle those roads.
Yeah, I think that's the key part. I think that's the part that the public would like to see, how that, how they are prioritized.
Yeah, we can certainly make that available.
Awesome. No, great. I know. Well, that's some questions I had on the roads. Thank you.
Go ahead, Bud.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out a couple things. So I know, if you remember when we did get those capital outlay exclusions and when we did have the road bond, there were a couple of roads, for lack of a better word, that were so blown apart we had to do like a full depth reclamation, which means, grinding out everything, rebuilding the base. It's really expensive. So the preferred alternative is once we get roads to a certain level, by doing more surface treatments, way less expensive per linear, whatever they measure, but the dollar goes a lot further. So I think Paul has really tried to knock off some of those really bad roads to hopefully get to the point where we'd be able to do more surface treatments so more roads were getting done each year. And as you drive around, I'm just going to use my subdivision as an example. Great Hills, like near the old exit 4, forget what the new number is, 63, whatever. The main road going up that subdivision, totally blown apart. DPW would be there 10 times a year, patching potholes. That all got redone the right way. A ton of roads off the side, but again, way less traveled than the main road up the middle. So some of those weren't touched. And as you'd expect, neighbors get all fired up. Well, how come we're not doing the whole subdivision? I'm like, here's a list, because I have Paul's list, and I go look at these 5 roads and tell me, is there worse than ours? And they're like, oh my God, there's so much work. I'm like, yeah, that's the problem, is he has to look out for 150 miles of public road, not just the mile that we're all familiar with near our homes. So that's one of the chores. And I would say the other thing that we've seen over time and that he's taught us is some of our drainage systems are totally failed. And there were a couple, I remember there was a humorous person at town meeting who had the photos of him fishing fishing in his road because, it wouldn't drain. And so a lot of the worst drainage systems we've totally redone, but it's not uncommon for those to be a couple $100,000 just to fix a drainage system. So as we get some of the problem children taken care of, I think people are going to start seeing a lot more miles of road being addressed because we're doing less severe treatments to bring them up to snuff and then hopefully keep them that way. So I think if Paul had that assurance of the money coming regularly, I think we've all seen a difference in the roads from, say, 10 years ago, but we know we still have a ways to go. I think, in 5 years' time, we would be saying, wow, this is working, so keep it up. personally.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Just a question, is this money operating budget or capital? If you don't use all of it this year, can some of it get carried over for the beginning of next year?
So this would be the operating budget. So Bud mentioned a split, meaning that the capital portion is the Chapter 90 state portion that can carry over each and every year. And for larger projects, we have to do that. For the Signet project, we sort of squirreled away some money for that project. We used up the operating budget for our other projects, but because we had to each year. But if there's money left over, we can carry that over. We typically don't carry it over.
Use the operating budget first and carry over whatever capital you can or have to. Use it if you can, but.
Right. Just to add to what Bud had said earlier, related to our backlog of roads, we have about a $20 million backlog of our roads for repairs. And there's, I've shown you in the past a deterioration curve that shows that you can spend $2 on the good roads or you spend $25 on the poor condition roads. And we've always been in sort of catch-up mode, spending money on the roads that need to be reconstructed. And awfully costly. We don't want to be in that mode. With this additional funding, we'll be able to get to a better PCI, which is that pavement condition index, up in the 80s. And so we'll have more good roads than we have bad roads. And we'll be able to maintain those roads with preventative maintenance, the chip seal you see out there on some of our subdivisions. So the phrase is keep the good roads good. That's where we want to be, and that's where this funding will help.
Paul, I remember from a couple of years ago that I did some research, and I think, help me recall, just for some baseline, Sandwich is like in the top 20 towns in the Commonwealth with miles of roads. That
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, for towns, it's top 20. It's even close to some of the cities and throughout the Commonwealth as well. A lot of Cape towns are like that also. For whatever reason, they just built a lot of roads back in the old days. And we've got 150 miles of road, which ranks, like you said, the top 20 in the state.
And then the study that Jim mentioned, how often do we have the professional firm come in to do that? Is it getting about time again?
It's every 5 years, so we're due for one this year. We do.
This year being the year we're in, or in 2026?
2026, yeah.
And have we planned for that in the budget?
That will be included in the budget, yeah.
Okay.
We do our own inventory each year, as you know. We take a look at the road list for the upcoming year. We'll perform cores to determine the exact condition of the road. And after a difficult winter like this, some roads that may have not been on the list might become on the list, become part of that list because we had a lot of frost heaves and a lot of issues with the drainage as well.
Very good. Jim, you had another question.
Yeah, actually, some fantastic information. I was just maybe you could share how a citizen could inform you folks that there was an issue with their road. I know there's an app, I'm told, or maybe you could just let the public know about that.
Yeah, there's an app on our website where if you have any issues related to anything throughout the town regarding infrastructure, could be potholes, drainage issues, they can send a work order request into us, and in response to them, that we've confirmed that we have received that, and it gets on our list to perform that work order list, and when that's completed, we send that information out that it was completed as well. Yeah. Sure.
Go ahead, Heather.
I'm going to do a commercial. Sandwich 311. It's on the website, very easy on the front homepage of the website, but you can also download an app onto your phone, whether it's an Android or an Apple, and you'd have it right with you at any time. You can take a picture of the pothole, mark your spot, send it in. It goes right to the Department of Public Works. You'll immediately get a response from them, and that gets logged right into their system. It's a very effective tool. can be used for any type of sort of issue that's a physical issue in town. Very effective.
Yeah, that can be used for snow and ice issues as well.
Fantastic, thank you.
Nancy?
I'm going to be fresh and ask if I can put a handicap parking spot on the 311 app. I just, in seriousness, I know it came up again this, in public comment. What is the target date for at least one more additional space here?
So when you talk about our infrastructure budget, it's all encompassing. So that includes road paving, it includes drainage, it includes our signal maintenance, it includes our signs, it includes our sidewalks, our ADA ramps and accessibility. So we have a backlog of all these infrastructure items. And a list is only as good as the funding you have to support that list. So partly why we're in front of you is to start knocking off some of those items. Roads are obviously a big one because that's a $20 million backlog, but we do have a list of ADA and accessibility areas we want to upgrade. And we've been working closely with the Bikeways and Pedestrian Committee to come up with a list and prioritize that list and start knocking those off with the funding available.
Heather?
Yeah, we will be working with architect Maria Raber from Catalyst that's done all the design for this building. In fact, I met with her on site and took a look at some of the options. Paul doesn't know this yet, but we'll be inviting Sam Jensen to meet with Maria and talk through what some of the locational options are. They all, of course, impact, what door someone might be entering, how that relates to whether it's the back door coming in, coming through where the Arts Alliance is located. So there are some kind of issues you have to work through all of those. She had some really good thoughts about that. We'll be looking at that as we work on the design. It may not be included in the IFB for the repair work. It's probably a different contractor to do that work. We'll be working with Paul and Sam to identify it. I think what I said the last time is that there's no easy solution, and some of the solutions may have impacts that we don't anticipate, like impacting green space, having accessible spaces in roadways where you might not normally want to put them, but just the geography of this area is tight, and that we'll have to see what the best options are, and we'll be taking a good look at that this spring.
And just to add to that, back when this building was restored, I don't know why the handicap spaces weren't completed at that time. We did the DPW, and we used our funding as well. We made some accessibility improvements out front with the stairways, as well as the adjacent sidewalk and ramps. And I know the engineering department was looking at a design out here. One included handicap spaces right along Grove Street. One included using part of Eaton Square as well. Pretty extensive because it's difficult to meet the standards, but I think it would make sense to revisit those plans to take a look at what we can potentially do as part of this new project as well.
I'm just going to go back to a question relative to the historical list you gave us, but more towards the future look of the history list, is the pending 2.757. I'm trying to match that to what's in our budget at 1.1.
So it's the 1.14, plus we're transferring like 400-something thousand from golf and marina, and then we're appropriating 1.2 million for CPA for the capital work on this building. So if you add those things together, it comes out to the 2.75.
Thank you. Do you guys want to continue on with other questions that we submitted? And
can I just finish the 5 pages? 'Cause
absolutely.
I think that should address some of the questions, but so page 3 is something that Bill put together probably a month or 2 ago, just because we look at stuff like this. And what it does is it shows you the average tax bill on Cape Cod from the Department of Revenue. So it has all 15 towns, and it has 4 fiscal years, FY22 through FY25. And so it's sorted on the 4-year change on the right. So over those 4 years, Sandwich's tax bills have gone up 15.81% on the average bill. And so it shows you that we're less than most of the towns on the Cape, and the Cape average is about 19. And as we've said from day one, demographically, we're way different than most of the towns on the Cape. So most years, until fairly recently, we were the highest, or more often the second highest. Provincetown was usually the highest. We were the second highest average bill on the Cape, and you can see over time we're now the fourth highest, with a fifth community pretty close to us. So it's hard to compare, and I would say the biggest difference once you get past Barnstable is so many second homes. Yarmouth on out, I bet you more, and the farther you go out, the higher the percentage goes. But I would think more than half of the homes in Dennis out are second homes, not year-round homes. So that's interesting. I don't know, it's just something we thought you'd be interested in, because
Thanks for this information. But I'm going to agree with you. I don't think that this is apples and oranges at all. I don't think a comparison to Cape Cod tax bills sort of makes much sense. And I believe that if you go to there's some sort of, I'm not going to remember the name, but there's a Massachusetts tax database that actually generates comparative communities. And I think for purposes, and not necessarily in this cycle, but going forward, what we should be striving to do is to look at that state database and pull like communities, and then make an assessment between those communities and our own in terms of how we're doing financially.
And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I would say the biggest difference of the 5 towns, Barnstable to the Bridges, every one of those 5 towns has a local school department. Every town from going the other way is a regional school department. I mean, that's a vast difference, obviously, between the communities. And just to back up what Bob said, I think it's called the Municipal Data Bank. So you can go on there, it's part of the DOR website, and they have all sorts of things you can compare to. I forget the term, but there is like a community thing, a box you can check. And if I remember, there's a lot of South Shore towns that pop up similar to Sandwich, and maybe 1 or 2 Cape towns. And then again, if you go and unhide the cells you could probably do it on the thumb drives that we have in the front of your binders. If you compare our average bill to the average state bill, for like 21 of the last 25 years, we're under the average state bill. So that's a broader, but again, every town's different, so it's hard to compare. So page 4.
On that note, I remember doing that exact same analysis, and I can tell by the way I sorted out that data from the state to do the analysis that I was looking at on road miles. But my sort was population, road miles, and something about single-family tax bill.
Yep.
And sorted it that way, and you come up with towns that are similar to us those ways all across the state. And I think the only one that's near us is Bourne.
Yeah.
But is, if you take 5 or 6 on either side, you got, so it might be better to maybe do the analysis against a group like that.
Yeah.
I agree with Bob. Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the criteria that I've heard from Bud over and over again is about second homes and regional schools versus town high school. Are those criteria available in the state database? Because if that's really what we believe is what makes us different, then I don't know what the value of a like community is if we can't see that.
I would think certainly second homes, we could find that. I'm not sure about regional school, how that would work, but we can check.
We do have the ability to do that. We can, yes.
You can also look at budget to valuation. So if you look at the total valuation of the town and the total budget, so you look at Chatham, for example, where their valuation is 3 times ours-ish, and their budget is less than ours, so they just have a larger base to spread their costs around. So there's a lot of data out there. One of the ones we've looked at recently is student population per capita. I think Sandwich has the highest student population per capita on the Cape. So we're educating more students per our population than other towns, which is why the budget for the schools may be more robust in other places.
In the database that I looked at, Jackie, school structure is there. So it indicates if you're a K through 8, K through 12, some towns did not have any data provided on that particular line item, which probably means they're completely regional, is my guess. But if you're K through 12, it looks to me as if it means you've got a similar school district that we have. Sudbury, for example, which falls on this list, is K through 8, and Sudbury's in a regional school district. So that data's there. So, yeah. Matt?
I was just going to mention it was the valuation. But if you take a ride around Chatham, Orleans, a lot of Falmouth, Osterville, Cotuit, a lot of the communities that we compare ourselves to, there's really no comparison when you just physically look at the homes and equate that to money. The home valuations in those communities is so high. I mean, it's baffling, really, the value of those homes, and that has a huge effect on our tax base. We have some of those homes. We don't have nearly the amount, and it has a huge effect as we're a more average community.
So page 4 I thought was really interesting. So I'll try to explain this quickly. So we talk a lot about our free cash certification and our excess levy capacity, and I would bet if you call your financial counterparts on other town committees, ask if they ever have heard the phrase excess levy capacity. I don't think most towns even talk about it, because most of them go right to the hilt, or not that much. So I guess I'll focus on free cash first. But if you look, we have, in terms of a percentage of our total budget, we have far and away the least free cash of any town on the Cape. And the best way I could describe it is we try to be tight with our budgets. We don't ask for overrides. It's been 21 years since we have. We cut it close, but we're not foolish. We don't, for example, pad our health insurance account by $2 million so we'll have bigger free cash the next year. Almost to the point that if I lived in some of those other towns, I'd want to say, why do we have so much free cash? Because you get that from charging people it but not spending it. The only other way you get it is if you so underestimate your local receipts, which we're all supposed to underestimate our local receipts, but you can look that up. We give you the data each year. Like, we underestimate by, $1.5 million. We don't underestimate by $5 million. But I just think it's sort of a mentality that we've had here, and I think sometimes we lose sight of it because that's all we've ever known, for lack of a better word. But, we run it fairly tight. We don't have a lot left over at the end. Some of the towns that I would say demographically immediately close to us that are similar to us, Bourne, Mashpee, like look at their free cash percentages. It's pretty amazing. And then excess levy, a lot of towns go right to the limit, as you can see. If they have less than 1%, it's probably because just on how they round to the penny when they set their tax rate. And we have far away the biggest excess levy capacity set aside of any of the towns on the Cape. We're almost $1 million more than the next highest, which is Chatham, and they're doing okay. The average home in Chatham is over 1.4 million now. We're at 717,000. So it's literally twice what a value is in Sandwich. So I just thought that was interesting, because this to me shows more of a mentality of how you budget and how you're trying not to tax people to the max. And I know things are expensive, and I know there's a lot of frustration about how much things cost everywhere today. Personally, and I'm just talking for myself, I still think local government is where you get your best bang for the buck. Look at what we all pay in state taxes or federal taxes, and where do you get more that impacts your life. And, I just have a feeling over time it's going to be more that way. So personally, now granted I'm biased because of what my job is and what I was trained to do and what my background is, but, I think there's a lot of good things we do for what we charge. And I know it gets more expensive each year, and that's frustrating, and there are some big things we need to do, but we've chipped away at a lot. So we have made progress, which is good. So there's not much to talk about on page 4, I don't think, but page 5, I want to be really careful, and I will explain all this in detail. I want to be really careful in what I say, especially when we get to those bigger projects sort of below the yellow line. So I'll explain the stuff on top. So right now for FY25, that's our average tax bill, and on the right is what the average home value is in Sandwich. So all the numbers that you see on the rest of the page are based on those two numbers. And so working with Bill and then talking it over with Heather and with Charlie, because Charlie and I have spent a lot of time because especially when I talk about the things below the yellow line, we haven't made public some of these costs because we haven't been given them by the experts who have scrubbed the numbers to say this is what we think you could show. So when I get to those numbers, I'm going to explain a range and how I came up with it and then how Bill came up with these numbers. So if you look at what the base budget that we had proposed would equate to an average increase of just over $250 on the average tax bill, which is a 3.34% increase from the year before. If we did the optimal budget again, which the only difference is the extra DPW infrastructure, it's another $38 like we had talked about. By the way, I took out the cents because, we had more details here, and I'm like, let's just, keep it round numbers as best we can. So that's what the impact would be if we did the optimal budget. It's right around $292 for the average bill. The 1% WIF surcharge, we can get that very accurately. I did put the footnote in italics on the far right, so it requires 2 votes, a special town meeting, which we had approved in January, so then it goes to the ballot in May. That 1% brings in roughly $750, and if you do the reverse math, that equates to a $73 increase over what people are being charged now, which is just under another 1%. So those numbers, those are very accurate based on solid data.
Bob.
So thank you. This is super helpful. So do those numbers include what a taxpayer would be paying for the existing water charge and CPA charge and whatever our current associated debt payments are? Is it reflected?
So that's all inclusive. It includes the debt, the 2 surcharges, the CPA and the WIF. So that's all inclusive, that's $75.82.
Thank you.
So I'm going to say caveats, and I'm going to be vague, but I'll be as specific as I can be. So on the debt exclusion projects, with a straight face, I only think there's 2 big ones that we can foresee, other than wastewater, which is a whole nother beast. And, I have a feeling we'll be talking in generalities 5 years from now, still not knowing what the best way to go about that is. But the 2 big projects are DPW fire, which is really the last of the general government projects that we need to do. And then I think we all realize that there's bigger needs at the school, at all 3 schools. We have not gotten an estimate on any of that. So again, I'll explain how we came up with these numbers and roughly what they represent. If you look at the box at the bottom, I'm probably going to say this twice, but we don't know the actual cost yet. We only would know that, once we had the final bids in and we knew what the costs were. We issued the debt. We found out what the rates were. Not to really confuse things, but there's 2 different ways we can issue debt. We can do level debt service, which tries to even out the payment for 30 years, and then it goes away. So it's almost like, I'm making up, you're paying $300 all the way for 30 years, then it goes away. Most of the time we do what's called level principal. So it starts out that you're paying way more than you will over time, and then it slowly goes off over those 30 years till it disappears. The reason most towns do debt that way is because you're a town and there's other things that you're going to be adding over time, so you're trying to ride the wave. When it starts to go down and you need to add something else, you try to level it off as best you can. So when we came up with these numbers, it's all reflective, because the numbers are so big, on a 30-year bond at 4%. And so we tried to, as you can see on these numbers, we really tried to round the numbers, because if it was $354, if we got it at 3.75 instead of 4, it would be way less than that, but we don't know what that is. So, I mean, we're trying to just give you a good ballpark. Matt can attest, because he's been on the DPW fire group for 3+ years. Like, we just got the cost estimate on design development stage, which is nowhere near close to bid specs. And that number, I'm being blunt, was in the upper 40s just for construction. So it didn't include architecture. It didn't include, your project manager, didn't include contingencies, all sorts of stuff. So long story short, our project manager and our engineer are taking those numbers, going through, it's a really 25-page report, going through each thing to see if they feel it's accurate or not, or did they miss something. In addition, between now and when we would be able to present this to, say, the voters at a town meeting, which in a perfect world could be in the fall, we want to pay for some extra, like soil borings and other things, so they can refine their design a little bit to get a better cost estimate, so some of it's not so vague. So what the numbers that you see, because we did a low and a high, it's roughly just below 50 million is the first line, and the next line is just above 60 million. So, and what we did was 30 years at 4% in those rough ranges, and then made it a round number. And because we were looking at level principal, just for the example tonight, I know Bill would really, because he only wants to count on the real numbers, so he would want to just show the first year. But I thought it was important to show, halfway through the debt, last year of the debt, and that it does go away once you've paid it off. So again, there's a whole nother option where we could do level debt service, where you could probably pay closer to $250 a year the whole 30 years, and then it goes to zero. That's a decision that the select board makes when they go to issue the bonds. There would have to be all sorts of discussion before that was done. But again, I just wanted to show you. So again, on the DPW fire station, which we haven't even told the select board what the full estimate is, because we don't have it back from our experts, the top number is just under 50 million. The bottom number is just over 60, in that range. It's staggering. That's what's happened to construction prices. And I think when Weston and Sampson was in, they showed you that line graph, and things are leveling out a little bit, but compared to what it was pre-COVID, the numbers have just gone crazy. We don't control those numbers. It would all have to be bid. You could get someone that was very aggressive. So you never know. But obviously that's a big number, a large amount. There's a lot of education. There's a lot of discussion that has to take place before it's presented to the public. So the next one on the school capital debt, and this is just Bill, Heather, and I on a Zoom talking over about what number should we throw in, because we didn't know. I know we had appropriated, between debt and some other numbers, the money they had from ARPA. It was about 15.75 million, if I recall, and I think they've gotten about 2/3 of the 3/4 of the projects done. They're really the HVAC and the boilers are the big needs, and they're way short based on the bids they've gotten. So we think in addition to that, if you had to look at everything that needs to be addressed at those 3 schools, I think the 3 of us feel that number is going to be really large. Is it, this is just hypothetically, this is one of the discussions we have, is it going to be so large that we should look at an MSBA project where the state picks up about half the cost? You have to build to a higher standard, but they pick up. I mean, that's something that we'll all have to, once we get a report back and we analyze that and prioritize it, that will take, over a year probably to do. So I just wanted to say, we just picked a number, much more than we did on the 15 million, but we have no idea what that upper limit could be. So this is roughly at 40 million, roughly. That school capital project number is roughly 40 million borrowed over 30 years at 4% what the cost would be. So that's how we came up with it. We didn't even want to put the numbers that the ranges represented, because my fear was I haven't gotten something that we feel comfortable enough to share with my bosses. I'm not going to put it on a piece of paper that then goes out to the public and they haven't even seen it yet. But those are the ranges that we've talked about. And I think our group on the DPW fire thing, we have a meeting coming up with our 2 consultants once they've looked at those numbers a little bit better in the next few weeks, just to see where they're coming from. So as best we can, project out what are some of those big costs coming down the road. And I have to say, once we look at the numbers, maybe they're so big, maybe we do look at level debt service. Maybe the concept is we don't hit people as hard at the beginning, and then hopefully, wages and other things change over time, so that same amount of money doesn't seem like as much 5 years from then. But, it's the same across, and then once you pay it all off, it just goes to zero. And that's the other thing, just to remind everyone, especially people at home on a debt exclusion, once you pay it off, we don't have a right to raise it again. It goes away. Many times something else pops up, 20 years down the road that we need, but that's what it looks like. And probably the biggest point I wanted to make, which I didn't make, is everything from the yellow line down, the public has to vote to do that. So it's, in a sense, it's different than the operating budget because we're trying to get the operating budget year to year, and Lord knows we went decades without doing any big building project, which is sort of why we had that pent-up list. And we've sort of made some decent inroads, but now we have a couple more to do. And the same's true with the 1% whiff surcharge, but that's a much smaller number.
Nancy?
So on the DPW fire station project, I'm sure there's an economy of scale by doing them, merging them together. Did you look at separating them by a number of years?
Yeah, so they're
Bring it
not,
down?
the way it would work, they're not physically connected because the topography of the site is so bad and so difficult. It actually made sense to build the DPW while the existing DPW stays in existence, move them, take down the old DPW and build the fire there. I mean, they're really close together. There's a lot of services that they will use jointly, but it's, that cycle, look how long it took to build the Cal. That was a couple years. So, I bet you that it could be a 2 to 3 year project, building DPW, moving them, raising that, taking it down, building fire. There's nothing fancy in either construction method that both people have looked at, and in fact the fire is pretty much very similar to what was built at headquarters without all the office space and the what we've learned about the dormitory space to don't have a bunk in each room, have 2 small rooms is better.
And Nancy, I assume the question would be staggering in order to lessen tax impact to residents all at once. I think the thing to remember is if you look at inflationary costs of construction over time, delaying the pain might make for more pain. Had we done these projects, had we done the DPW and fire station a decade ago when we started talking about it, would be looking at numbers half the size, if not less. So I think the longer we wait, the more we end up spending in the long term. And so I think that's something just for everybody to keep in mind, that while they're painful numbers, they're not going to get better, I don't think.
I just think that this needs to be said because I'm sure it'll come up, and it's good to think about it ahead of time.
Jim?
And is there also a 911 call center that we have to do down the road?
So that we signed an intermunicipal agreement with Barnstable, Yarmouth, and Sandwich. So there's a new call, a 911 regional dispatch being built in Barnstable behind their existing police station, 100% funded by the state, including equipment. The projection for our first 3 years is we're going to save $750,000 a year by going to that. So we're full in. We've gotten jointly, the 3 towns have gotten 2 rounds of grants that are taking it all the way to construction documents. Third round will be after July 1st. Chief Burke, who's our primary designee to that group, He thinks that it could be operational at some point in calendar year 2027. So hypothetically, it's the last half of the year. We're not going to see the full savings until FY, because the last half of 27 is actually fiscal 28. We'll probably see the real full savings in FY 29 of at least 750,000 a year. Like I look for, whenever the budget gets submitted that year, there's a good chance you'll see that the general government budget is less than it was the year before, quite a bit less.
And again, that was 100% covered by the state.
Yeah, and that's the unique thing about doing agreeing to go to a regional dispatch. So not to be too confusing, the sheriff's office has fire dispatch. They don't dispatch police departments. They're looking at taking on more towns and probably expanding. It actually benefits both regional dispatch to have a partner if one ever goes down. And so this is going to get confusing. We have 9 dispatchers in Sandwich, and we have a dispatch supervisor. In order to keep the station open 24/7 like we want to, we've come up with a method to retain 5 of those dispatchers. So if a police call goes into regional dispatch, it's going to be transferred back to Sandwich, and they're just going to communicate with police only locally. But they will also serve as our ability to keep the front door open 24/7 if someone walks in. So that 750,000 I mentioned is net of the cost to keep those 5 people. So that was actually a great solution that the chief and deputy chief came up with for only a little bit more than if we hired 5 civilians. These people are trained dispatchers, they're medically trained. I think it's going to work out really well. And one thing Chief Burke just told me is they would like to, meaning the state 911 board, in an extreme emergency would like a 3rd backup. If we volunteer and say, hey, those 5 people will be the 3rd backup, and right now our building already has about 3 stations, so we can have 3 dispatchers at once in our current police station. We'll only have 1 down the road. If that can be the 3rd backup, the state will pay for all of our capital costs and all of our IT upgrades over the years. So we think it's a no-brainer. We're like, okay, sign us up. So at some point, that would be a great conversation to have the 2 chiefs in to talk about that. I think we'll know a lot more in the fall because we will be in this 3rd round of grants, and maybe they would even have construction bids. If you know where the Barnstable Police Station is, that I'm looking at Andrew because is it Finney's? So just if you drive past the police station, there's the DNR stuff on the right. I think they've even cleared part of the land. It's right behind it on Finney's Lane. It's an 8,000 square foot building they're going to build.
Those are great savings for the town to know, especially,
And we think we'll get better service. Nothing against the service we get now, but we think with the regional, it'll be even better. As Bob was saying about like second homes and seasonality and like comparing ourselves to other towns, this sounds weird because I think year-round population, us and Yarmouth are pretty close. They used to be bigger than us. We might have switched. They get so many more calls in the summer because all the motels, all the lodging places, we're only 17% of the joint calls, and that's how they determine what you get charged back. Because Barnstable's so big and Yarmouth balloons in the summer, it's actually going to cost us less, which is great. And it's fair. It's based on per call.
Bill?
Thanks, Ed. I just wanted to add one thing to what Bud was talking about when looking at those year 1 and year 15 and year 30 numbers. The key part of this is really looking at the interest rate. I know you've all heard me say this, but right now interest rates are not good. We're using that conservative estimate of 4%. By the time this project got rolling, the town would certainly look at all financing, advantages we could take. There's some things where we could do what's called a bond anticipation note and hope that in a year the rates come down somewhat. If this rate, was in the at 3%, these numbers on year 1 would probably drop between $70 and $80 each. So interest rates are going to have a huge impact on what those costs can be. I think we're all hopeful to see interest rates come down slowly over these next couple years, but that's really important to keep in mind. As right now, we're borrowing at a very expensive time at 4%. As you may remember, for the schools and when we did the marina building years ago, we actually borrowed money under 2%. So, if we could get these rates, between 2.5% and 3.5%, those year one numbers would come down as well. So interest rates are going to play an important part of how much these actually cost taxpayers by the time this project came, if it got approved at both town meeting and the ballot. Thank you.
Jackie.
So, Bill, I guess assuming the DPW and fire goes to town meeting and ballot in the fall, or goes to town meeting in the fall and is approved, are we talking about the next, or which fiscal year would this begin, assuming you had to go out and get financing?
It would really depend on when the construction started and when we needed to have financing in place to pay for that construction. A lot of times it depends on, the debt we sell. As Bud mentioned, there's two different ways we can sell debt. Generally, you don't have to pay the first year you borrow money, you pay the very next year after. Again, we'd be looking at all sorts of financing options. There's also premiums available that the town would look for as well. But generally, the rule of thumb, and it's not always the case, is if, let's say, we borrowed money in FY26 per se, we would make the first payment in FY27.
Hey, Bill, if it would help, I think it's 3 years away, because if we get the money, all we had money for was design development. So like what you guys saw in your presentation, we're not going to be able to take it much further than that. So to go all the way to construction plans, they told us would take about 10 to 12 months. So I mean, just to develop the plans to be able to go out to bid is a whole nother year. Then you go out to bid and they will present to us cash flow analysis about when we need money to pay certain things. I think like Bill said, maybe you'd split it up into a couple of borrowings, or maybe you'd do some bands just to buy yourself time and then do the bigger one once you knew like what the actual bid amount was. So,
and are we planning to go out for the school capital? Plan to go for approval also?
We don't even have the study that says what the problems are.
So that's
like,
a no. Yeah.
I think I shared with you.
Yeah, there's something. Okay.
I think that's even further off. And then I just want to stress when, the numbers they look so nice, 350, 250, 150. If it was within 10, I made it like round, because it's it's just ranges and rough estimates. So
Right, I was just hoping the vertical line down did not line up.
We could,
because that, once you start, even if you took just the average of the two different DPW estimates, you look down the line, that starts to get to be a significant percent.
I actually bought the debt calculator that the state has online. And I have it on a stick. I could plug it in, I could project it, and we could just show you if you did level debt service, it would be, or Bill could do it at home and tell us. It's like, it's substantially less, but you pay that whole amount, so there's no decrease until that 30th year, which it could be worth exploring.
Kevin?
Just to dumb this down, essentially, looking back a couple pages, over the last 4 or 5 years, for the average house, tax bill's gone up about 5% a year. An average. It's actually 5.2, but yeah. Mm-hmm. We're projecting this year it'll go up just about 5%. And if you took the average of that DPW fire station, that would be another 5%. But that's kind of where it is. Mm-hmm. It's about the same. The DPW fire station is about the same increase as what you normally see every year. It's just going to be kind of a double increase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really becomes 10%.
It'll become a 10% that year, and then the following year will just go up 5%.
So that's a good summary, Kevin, thanks. And, it's a good summary, and this is helpful. And I like calculating the percent increases because I think it's the way people think. It certainly helps me an awful lot. So other numbers that you can write down just for fun. According to Social Security, the most recent cost of living adjustment was 2.5%. So fixed income, retirees, etc., generally speaking, 2.5%. U.S. inflation, according to Social Security, its most recent number is 2.7%. And from the same data sources, the Massachusetts median household income increased 1.8% this year. So I think for all of us, as we're thinking about budgets and changes to the budgets and increases, you know, we're talking about a base budget increase of 3.34, an optimal budget increase, which was already voted by the selectmen, of 3.85, call it 4 just for fun. We've already, this board recommended, with some voting no, recommended the water surcharge, that's another percent, right? And now we're looking at items that potentially are well beyond 3.5%, 4.5% increases. So I just think these are really helpful numbers to have in front of us so that we can think about, you know, our recommendations and rationale, and other boards and committees can do the same. Good information. Thank you.
And I just want to stress again, like, those are rough ranges. I mean, God forbid we get the final number and it's 65, well, then I'll get you the number on the 65. But
For planning purposes, though, you've mentioned a couple times about the reports. We've talked about that at several meetings, including a tri-board meeting.
Yeah.
Where are we with that? Is it in the budget for 2026? Because the estimate was maybe too much for 25.
Yeah. It's not. So my personal thought is, like, I think once we get, I mean, I'm not whining. Like, between now and town meeting is really tough. On a lot of nights out, a lot of stuff getting ready. Like, once we get past town meeting, if I could, like, sit down with the school, double check the list, and then get a scope of work together that's good enough that we could at least get some estimates back. Then we could all put our heads around it. Hypothetically, this is just, you know, like, say the price comes in at $350,000, which certainly neither us nor the school have to do that study right now. If we knew before a fall special, maybe if we had free cash certified, we'd decide to spend something on that. Or maybe the committee would say, you know, school, if you can come up with 100 in the town, you come up with 50, we'll try to come up with the rest from our reserve fund. And, you know, if we have a bad snow and ice year, we'll try to find, I mean, because I think that study is going to take a long time to get together, and it's going to take a long time to analyze once it's done. And I firmly believe, except for these two buildings, most of the stuff on the town side is going to be like a maintenance plan moving forward to try to keep things at a certain level. It's not going to be, certainly not any debt like this. I think the schools, you know, they're older building, you know, they're showing their age. We need to, there's going to have to be some expenses there.
My other question is around the schools, right? So in the 10-year capital plan, the school budget over the next 5 years or so is like at $7.5 million. So where do we go from 7.5 to your collective mind saying it might be 40? Why?
I think they know.
How do we get
like,
the schools to say what the real numbers are?
I think
does it need that study?
I think it's because, like, the annual capital budget, there's no way you could afford to, I don't know, what if we had to replace the roof on the high school, what would that be? I mean, that's a lot of money. Now, granted, part of that was what they got the $15 million for, and some of it's been done. But I think those numbers dwarf what we're able to come up with in the annual capital, which is why they're not listed there. But that's why we need that report on those other buildings, and I don't mean to keep putting it off. It's just, I don't have the time to, like, see it through the finish line, and I got to work with my school colleagues to make sure we get it.
One more question I had was just for these projects and other large projects, that there's the possibility that we're doing this work and town meeting says, no, thank you for this year. So how are we kind of, or should we be in parallel doing at least some planning around the what if of a no vote?
So we're looking at that on the two buildings, because I know you guys have been through them probably a couple years ago. Like, we need to go through them again so you can see. Like, there's some serious money that's so where we got the quote back from the engineering firm that I think I shared with you was $46,000 to look at those two buildings, which seemed like way too rich for our blood. We've since gone back to our project manager and the engineering firm that's doing the DPW, because they've looked at both old buildings, and we said, if you could do a report like that for us, but toned down from what the other group was going to do, like how much would it cost us? So literally, we're supposed to have a call on that next week. And I'm just going to single him out because Charlie is very persistent in telling me, you got to get, like, we got to get a study, exactly what you said, because if the voters say no, we know, even just to bring them up to code and make them livable, I think, I don't want to throw out a number, but it's going to be multi-million.
Matt?
So I agree it would be nice to know the cost of bringing those buildings up to code. Those buildings they don't serve the purpose we need, so I think it's important for the community to remember that I personally find the thought of spending $150,000 on a study to see how much it's going to cost to bring those two buildings up to code, a severe waste of $150,000, because they don't serve the purpose we need them to serve. And so I feel like would be throwing really good money away. And so I personally wouldn't be wanting to spend that money. I understand why the community, I understand why Charlie wants to know. I'd like to know at a far lesser cost, as we're trying to do, as Bud just stated.
The study, though, would be more comprehensive than just those two buildings. It would include the schools.
Big one, yes, yeah.
Big one, yeah.
And that would come later?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I just think on those two buildings, as we think about those, I do think it's just important for the town and the voters, I'm not necessarily speaking to the committee, I think we all are well versed in all of this, to keep in mind that those buildings have outlived their useful life, that become a financial burden on our departments. We can't attract good employees. It's more than just that the buildings are, it's not that they're not maintained. They're just not the appropriate building for the services that we need to provide for our community.
Kevin?
In this year's budget, did we budget for furthering the designs?
No.
So-
They're getting us an estimate of like some low-cost hanging fruit that I would find a way to pay for, to do a couple more soil borings and a couple of they're actually preparing that for us. So we should know that in a week or two as well.
So we'd be sitting here next year
Yep.
saying we need to fund the 12-month design process.
We're going to go for the group who's been working on it has talked about going for the home run. We're going for the design money and the construction money.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
Is the design far enough along to really get us a good estimate?
This is the perennial question when it comes to construction design is how much do you want to sink into the design? Because to get it to the next level, it's a very big number. And so do you want to spend the very big number without knowing whether the community wants to fund the project in total? So you've done it. Sandwich has done this on the Center for Active Living and the library. You went with design development estimates there. We did really well on those. We had a good team, but we had a really good market. So that's really the question.
It's just in bringing it to the town and looking at your numbers. I mean, there's a big difference between 45 million and 65 million.
Yep.
Just under 50 and just over.
Yeah. Yeah.
That being said, when you get it and you at least get started, the plans aren't going to go bad. If the town were to decide, yeah, we need to do this, the plans aren't going to go bad. But
Right.
if we keep waiting another year, say, okay, well, we got to get all the money, and then we got another year to get the design done, and then another year to get started. Just thinking may need to accelerate the process a bit.
And I should, because one of the questions the group asked when we got the first rough estimate before our consultants had taken a look at them closely, we made sure, does that include the road connection to Charles Street that Chief Burke has? So that's all in there. Because that's a big, there's a lot of site work on a site that drops off so much. And we did look at other sites. It was all within the same ballpark, so it was.
And of course, the range, we're not going to have that range when we go to town meeting. We're going to have a good cost estimate at that point. I think right now the range is because we're still waiting for the good cost estimate to come back.
And I think we're going to try to winnow it down too.
Yeah.
We're going to.
I think the risk is though, if we spend a lot of money on a design and then town meeting does not vote in favor, we've then wasted some money, and while the design doesn't go bad, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to bring the same project back to town meeting.
It is a challenge, but then it's also, if you've got to go another year before you do it, it just keeps putting the construction off further at a higher rate further.
Don't disagree.
We had a thought, but I'm not going to say it publicly.
Bud and Bill, any further responses to any of the questions that we sent that maybe we didn't cover so far?
I think all of us who work day to day fully support and agree with the concept. Like, we have to be upfront with people about what we think some of these bigger costs will be. We just are nervous about putting a number out there because it seems like if we put a number out, that would be a headline when we don't even have that number yet. So that's why we're dancing and why we're being a little bit vague, but those numbers are pretty close and,
Okay, a couple of us had a question around the budget that we would be making a recommendation on, and would we have a shot at, as the Board of Selectmen did, of the optimal budget or the foundational budget? And you guys came back with the response on that, so maybe just address that, just so we know that we're going to be voting on a recommendation to the optimal budget.
Yeah, I would say, you should make a recommendation on that, but if you don't support that, you fully have a right to say we recommend making it up, a reduction of blank dollars from this one budget. I don't have the charter in front of me, but my recollection is there's a provision there that allows for, if the Finance Committee has a different budget, it could be presented in, a different article, and at least present it to the voters. I know historically, in 35 years, I think we've only had a difference twice, and both times it didn't even add up to $100,000, but it has happened before.
Kevin?
Yeah, and I think this actually came up from a question that I had asked. I just found it odd that you had been presenting two budgets to us, a base budget and an optimal budget. And we'd gone through 5 meetings with 2 budgets, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, get rid of one of them. We're just using one. Just going to use the other one. It happened to be the one I liked, but it's just seemed odd that you just went away.
The hard part is John Giorgio, our main contact at Town Council, says most of the dates in the charter, even though they seem set in cement, they're advisory. So if you look at the charter, the Select Board is supposed to vote by the end of February what budget to recommend to the Finance Committee, which is why I pushed them for a vote, and because of timing, we didn't do it till the first week in March. So that's why, because the charter says they're supposed to vote that recommended budget. Doesn't mean it's the final budget, because the best example I could give, say the 3 of us get really bad numbers from the state next month or next few weeks, we'll be changing our estimates and we'd be cutting things, I would think. That's just what we've done previously, but everything we're hearing from the state, things look, I don't think the governor overestimated her budget, and from what I've heard, the House Ways and Means and the Senate Ways and Means are looking at numbers to towns higher than what the governor proposed. Not drastically, and as you guys know, we don't get a ton of discretionary aid. We get a good amount of Chapter 70 aid, but we really don't get much discretionary aid. In fact, it's gone down 2 of the last 3 years because they've shortchanged us on charter reimbursements.
Okay, so given that we know what we'll be making a recommendation on, we planned in the agenda tonight for some discussion, that and so that we can take some time as the Finance Committee to hear maybe each other's thoughts on the budget that the Board of Selectmen recommended, and that's in front of us. The town charter, I did take a look at something there, charges us with conducting a detailed line item review of the town and school budgets and to make an advisory recommendations on all financial warrant articles and the projected tax impact consistent with its recommendations. I think we've accomplished that over the number of weeks that we've been meeting since late January, thanks to all of the information that Bill and Bud and Heather and the rest of the team at the town have put together for us. But I did want to leave time for anyone who does have a thought as we contemplate over the next week our recommendation for the budget. So does anyone want to lead off or have anything to comment on? Nancy?
So I am still very bothered about the money that was given to the schools for the care and custody of the wing school. And I remember, and there are people at this table that were around that were part of some committee that were part of that. So if the superintendent says, I didn't know about it, there were people on his staff that should have known about it. And the whole idea was that they were supposed to return that money to the town. And now it's in their base budget. They said, thank you very much. They were using it for salaries. And I'm just really bothered about that. And I don't think it's right. And I just have a problem with it. And I wondered if anybody else did. Or Bud, if you have any thoughts on what happened.
I couldn't remember what the discussion was. The thing that I remember most was about utilities, I think. And then the collaborative was paying for a certain percentage, but I thought we were still at roughly 50%. Like, I thought that was big. I know when Dr. Canfield and the board and the school committee at that time went to 3 schools, but they kept the administration and facilities at the Henry T. Wing, I know all the custodial staff moved to the other buildings. So that was well before they closed the wing school. So I don't think there was any personnel savings that I was aware of, because I know they were very upfront about that they moved those to the other schools.
Well, they charged a percent of some of the custodian salaries to the wing school because they were there, and then those all got distributed, elsewhere. But it was supposed to be a separate line item, and it wasn't. It was put into their base, and thank you very much. Now it's been growing with the base, and now if this committee or all the committees want to say, oh well, that's fine with me, then it should have at least been designated for. We have all these maintenance issues. Why does it go to salary? And so I'm just really bothered by that. But that's my opinion.
Thank you, Nancy. Kevin?
I'm sure that what they probably did is they had their budget, it came out, they didn't need that, but it just got absorbed elsewhere. But I would like to see, in building on that, they've got wastewater treatment plants that they operate and maintain. If the town takes over the operation and maintenance of it, and I'm going to say $50,000 that the school pays to do it, they're not going to have to, but the town will. So that $50,000 should come out of one budget to go into the other to pay for it, not just get absorbed and then the town have an additional $50,000. And I think that's kind of what happened, though, with the wing school is it went away, the expense of it went away, but the money just got dispersed. I don't think it wasn't taken or anything. It just got built into other budgets, and it wasn't just a line item saying save 200 here, the others went up. It just kind of became part of everything else.
Bob?
So I think I'm going to save my powder for the budget for next week, but I've got a couple of sort of philosophic things that we can and should think about as a committee, and maybe, put them on an agenda for some later time. But picking up on Nancy and Kevin's focus on maintenance, right? Buildings and maintenance. It's interesting. Heather gave us a memo summarizing building repairs, and she provided a list of what was going on here and the capital expenditures. And at the top of that memo, she describes non-ordinary maintenance and repair projects, and that would be what we're dedicating capital to. But I noticed that among the capital items that were listed out this year, and probably in previous years, was painting rooms. And, I have to say that I don't really think painting rooms is something other than ordinary maintenance, right? Should be in your budget. That's how we maintain buildings, and that's how they're preserved, reasonably preserved and cared for year after year. But that's become a capital item. So I do think this committee would be well served to, at some point on a future agenda, put building maintenance and repair onto an agenda to understand through each department how they are using their operating budgets for ordinary maintenance. I suspect it doesn't happen too much. And Kevin, to your point, I'm betting there hasn't been quote-unquote maintenance and repair to those water facilities at the schools, which is why they're no longer good, and we've come up with a new plan. And I think that's most taxpayers' suspicions. So if we could, Mr. Chair, at a future meeting. Also, I'd like to remind all of us that Bud presented information about the fact that the health and retirement plan increases alone in the town are consuming a huge portion of the annual allowed tax increase, and that number keeps growing. So, much like that famous Leonardo DiCaprio movie, there is a giant iceberg coming straight at us, and we should be talking about it and planning for it. So, Mr. Chair, I would suggest those two items as a future Finance Committee discussion. Thanks.
I'm going to tag along on Bob. First on the last item that you covered. In the budget documents that we were giving under the, where it talked about going forward with the optimal budget, and this was the earliest one of the earliest documents we got. It mentioned a primary policy decision that relative to using the excess levy capacity. So if we're accepting the optimal budget or recommending that in town meeting, are we also then endorsing or moving forward with the policy decision that will use that excess levy capacity?
Yeah, I think the base budget, was about 3.4, 3.5. The optimal was 3.1. So it did eat into that a little bit. There were other savings from the 100,000 from the snow and ice that we didn't need, and I think there was one other item that added up to the 560.
But the point is that going forward, the excess levy percentage that we went through will continue to shrink.
Potentially, we're very safe on our new growth estimate.
Continue to grow, I guess,
so a lot of it will depend on what happens to that over time. Like we've been pretty good with that though. Like I was surprised. I personally thought once we funded the Center for Active Living in the library, we'd have a much less levy capacity, and we haven't. So that's good so far.
And then Bob's other point, where I clearly recognize I'm going to sound like a broken record on this discussion item, but since 2021, I've been raising concerns around our maintenance budget within the capital plan. I've advocated at meetings that we need to adequately fund maintenance for both the town and the school budgets to meet the needs of all our facilities and infrastructure. Even with the 2022 $25,000 increase in each of the schools and towns' budgets, we know that's not enough. To Bob's point of having a discussion on maintenance, we did have Brian Schlegel in last June to the committee, and at that time, he told us he believed an annual capital appropriation of $300,000 would address most of the normal building needs annually. In the long-range capital plan, we see status quo at a 150 for the next couple years, and then an increase to 175,000, scaling up to 200 as we move further down the line over 10 years. It's still a way off to where our town expert, Brian, says we should be.
We did add the 60,000 though that he identified, so that's been added.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm
Yep.
just getting to that. Yeah. So I do want to recognize that the maintenance department operating expense was increased by 60,000 for maintenance expenses, which is more than what Brian expressed a need for. But as well as, and then we have also added the new line item called the Annual Historical Buildings Repair and Maintenance Fund, if you will, as a means to adding to the maintenance budget. But even with that, we don't get to the recommended 500,000 in maintenance department and capital budgets. And then related to the annual historical buildings repair and maintenance line item, despite explanations provided, I'm still surprised that we call these types of projects out when work identified over the next 10 years is just a fraction of what is needed at Oakcrest facilities, as an example, right? We have $232,000 in identified historical property work in the capital plan versus close to $1.3 million at Oakcrest over that same period of time. So to me, it really begs the question, why don't we have an Oakcrest repair and maintenance fund or line item, or for that any facility group beyond the historical buildings? And then also, should the Oakcrest work really be combined into one larger ask, given the scope of what's needed to be done? There are over 25 smaller projects that add up to that $1.3 million over the next number of years. So although I know the need to support many of the projects that are on that capital request list, right now my head on the capital is I'm really questioning whether I can support it given my continued ask since 2021 to do something about capital and repair and maintenance specifically. So those are my thoughts. Just food for thought for the committee and for others as we get ready for next week. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? All right. If not, thank you. We'll move to next couple of agenda items. Old business. Anyone have any old business that I didn't anticipate, or any new business that we didn't anticipate either? Okay. Our next item is opportunity for public comments at this time. Jean?
Jean Perini, 6 Piccadilly Road. I think this was a very good discussion this evening. There was a discussion about the Massachusetts Department of Revenue database that I think Bob and others have referenced. I've also have taken a look at that database and saw, of course, that the average real estate tax bill for the residents of Sandwich is $7,582, which, is all in the budget material. But as it's listed on the DOR site, it shows the town of Sandwich listed as number something like 225 out of the 352 roughly cities and towns. So that suggests to me that town of Sandwich residents' average tax bill is higher than the rest of the state. Then, if you take into consideration what Sandwich residents are paying for transfer fees for waste management, the sticker price along with the trash bag fees, you're talking another couple $100. And for probably some families, you're talking $400. Then you're looking at an average tax bill of close to $7,600, and then maybe $400 for waste management. Now we're up to $8,000. So I think that has to be thought about as well. And so I just think it's a case, and then we're looking at other fee increases, building permit fees, just about any type of service the town of Sandwich provides, there's going to be a fee increase, as we've seen. So I think, as was mentioned, this is becoming very impactful to the residents of Sandwich. And I'm hoping that we can sharpen that pencil a little bit more. Another consideration is the town debt that got some mention tonight. Where do we stand? You know, if we're looking at Department of Revenue town statistics, where does Sandwich stand as far as debt? I think in previous conversations, I think the total debt for Sandwich is roughly $53 million, if I'm correct on that, based on discussions with town officials. Where will we stand if town meeting approves the department, DPW, and fire stations? Where will we stand? So I'm hoping when you make your recommendations, you keep all that in mind along with all the other information that you have. Because I think there's got to come a time when Sandwich residents can't bear anymore. They're just not going to be able to do it. And I think that pencil can be sharpened a little bit more. And thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Gene. Any other public comment? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you all tonight, all our Finance Committee members, Bill, Heather, Bud, thank you for coming prepared with answers and documents to our questions and thoughts. So that was very, very, very helpful. Our next Finance Committee is planned for next week, Tuesday, March 25th. At that meeting, the committee is expected to look to make recommendations on the fiscal 2026 and other budget and other warrant articles in advance of annual town meeting. If there are questions ahead of that you want the team to be prepared for, please get them to Bill and or myself before then. That's always very helpful. Does anybody else have any closing remarks? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Very good. Thank you. All in favor?